On 531 PI.
It is 13 minutes past 8 o'clock. Great to be in your company this morning here at Pacific Mornings on 531 PI, broadcasting from beautiful Rarotonga this morning. Now, recent police reports have raised urgent questions about child protection, institutional accountability, and the safety of vulnerable communities. Joining us now is Anna Lazar, Save the Children's Child Protection Technical Advisor for the Pacific, to help us unpack all of this, from gaps in safeguarding systems and the long-term support needed for survivors. Kia ora, Anna. Thank you so much for your time.
Morning, Will. Thanks for having me.
Look, given recent reports of child sexual abuse in the Pacific, what do you think it reveals about the state of child protection systems in the Pacific, particularly in remote or faith-based environments?
Yeah, look, I think it reveals in short that violence against children is still prevalent and widespread in the Pacific as it is in other parts of the world. And not just child sexual abuse and violence, but other forms of violence as well. And that simply more investment and attention is needed to address the issue and ensure that children are better protected. And, from recent research we have done across the Pacific in child protection, we know that violence against children is actually increasing, and 4 over 5 children, experience violent discipline, for example, from their caregivers. So it's very important that we act now. And with that, we need to really think about more careful and smart investments in terms of, for example, stronger enforcement of laws and more child-friendly services, training the social workforce that looks at these cases, and also addressing some of those cultural barriers that we often see. And just as an example, and that's very specific for child sexual abuse, often we have heard from our communities that we work with that there's a culture of silence and stigma and shame around child sexual abuse, which leads to it being underreported. And then it's very, very difficult to unpack it and address it and provide the adequate support to children. So yeah, it's important that we prioritize all these interventions.
Yeah, are there gaps in how religious or international organizations screen and monitor people working with children in the region, do you think?
I mean, look, there's risks in terms of child safeguarding, child protection for any organizations that works with children. Faith-based organizations are some of them, but the same would apply to sport associations, to schools. So it's of utmost importance that all the requirements and standards are fulfilled in terms of providing the safety to children that they deserve. And I mean, it's very important, for example, to start with clear risk assessments and having clear policies and code of conducts in place. Safe recruitment is very important, doing all the required police checks and reference checks of new staff and associates, having trainings of staff and all the people that are engaged, especially directly with children. And having all those, standards fulfilled that would enable us to do no harm to children, which is, at the fourth most importance when, organizations like faith organization that you mentioned or other work directly with children.
Here's the big question, I suppose, is how do you ensure culturally appropriate trauma support for children, right, in Pacific Island nations where arguably access to mental health care is limited?
Yeah, you're right. It's certainly limited. And I mean, whilst we personally as Save the Children don't do necessary direct trauma support and counseling support, um, we take this very seriously. We know that violence is preventable, and also that children with the adequate love and care and support can recover from trauma. So we work very closely with government authorities, with service providers across the Pacific to ensure that children who are at risk of violence or who have been experiencing violence receive the adequate support. I guess, for example, in emergency contexts like cyclones or earthquakes across the Pacific that we know happen regularly, we set up child-friendly spaces and provide psychosocial support to children and give them really that sense of safe space for learning, for reconnecting with people, to find a new way to normalize and go back their routine, which obviously have been really affected strongly by these disasters. So that's how we actually provide that mental and psychosocial support to children. But certainly a lot more is needed, in terms of government investments and service provisions that are dedicated to children specifically.
Yeah, and you've touched on, some reasons already on, or perhaps how we prevent future harm to our most vulnerable. But I suppose, do you also recognize, especially in Pacific nations, legal systems and government are often fragile when it comes to preventative measures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I mean, a lot of progress has been done though in the Pacific across the different countries and systems. We have to recognize that over time. But certainly, more progress is needed. We need to invest more. I mean, our research found that only 0.06% of national budgets across the Pacific on average are dedicated to children. 0.06%. We can't get very far with that, and we need to prioritize the rights of children, the needs of children. So increasing budgets is a major aspect of these preventative measures. Stronger laws enforced. Sometimes they are existing, but they're not enforced or they're not consistent. Um, a social workforce that's more equipped to identify cases of violence and then report them adequately in coordination with other actors that are responsible for the protection of children, stronger data collection, better services. And certainly, a lot of our communities we spoke to have talked about the need for more sensitization programs, around positive parenting, around child rights, around how to keep children safe. And, also I think quite a lot of the voice that we hear from children themselves and child protection actors, let's involve children more in this decision making that affects their lives. I think governance systems are sometimes lacking in providing the right voice to children as well. So yeah, it's quite a complex set of, so to say, possible solutions, but very much needed and very urgent.
In your capacity and in your role, I mean, how common are cases in the Pacific that air, in terms of, this kind of abuse?
They're certainly common. We hear and receive reports regularly from communities. We take them very seriously. We work with government and with our partners to ensure that they are referred to the appropriate authorities and looked upon in such a way that each individual case can be given the adequate support. Might that be through health, through mental health, to different care arrangements, for example. Whilst we don't provide that directly, we are responsible to work with government and service provisions to ensure that children can be kept safe. And then we've got local staff that are trained in child protection and child safeguarding, and they follow up these cases and ensure that, with more awareness around what child protection is all about and violence against children and its negative effects, also comes a response whereby children that requires receive the adequate care in time. So certainly, frequent, and we take it very seriously.
Why do these, and this is perhaps speculative at best, but why do these abuses often go unreported for so long? Is it that
Mhm.
power dynamic or trust thing?
That is a very, very good question, William. What comes to mind here is a child that we spoke to in Tonga. They mentioned, I will not report sexual abuse that is happening in my family because my mother is too worried about the repercussions. There's certainly a fear of backlash, of repercussions. I think gender norms here play certainly a role, and higher rates of sexual abuse are expected to be more prevalent in culture that where there is a perceived male superiority. So that's one area of I guess the reasons. There's stigma surrounded sexual abuse and shame. Often, girls in particular are seen as devalued if they experience violence, which makes them harder also to marry off. There's a general culture of silence. We need to think that these are also very close and small communities. So often the perpetuators are close relative or close community members, and revealing these dynamics can be very, very tricky. And there's also lots of other reasons, like children might not feel um, you know confident to report because they might not feel they will be believed, or there's a lack of trust that the system will actually do anything about it. And then culturally across the Pacific, a lot of the communities we talk about customary justice and reconciliation and compensation system that happen in very hidden, closed settings, whereby compensation is given to the survivor, but there's not necessarily the proper reparation needed. And so all of this creates more of a culture of silence, of a hidden abuse, which leads to, these cases often unfortunately remaining underreported, and
Sure.
therefore children miss out on the support they require.
Just before we wrap it up, I suppose what work is Save the Children currently doing to strengthen child protection across the Pacific? I know you've highlighted some measures, but perhaps if you want to go a bit more in depth on that, and
Okay.
also what measures you'd like to see.
Yep. Sure, thanks, Will. I mean, Save the Children, all its partners are engaged in joint efforts. We cannot do this work by ourselves, so we work with government, with other civil society organizations, with faith-based groups, with communities and children and youth themselves. I guess we do four more main areas of work. We work on advocacy for stronger laws and policies. For example, we recently been working on the Make It 18 campaign in Solomon Islands to increase the legal minimum age of marriage to 18. We involve very closely children and youth in these campaigns. The second component is around prevention, so working on campaigns, on positive parenting programs, on child clubs to enable children and parents and teachers to be better informed about child protection. Then we have the response side of things, so looking at the case management, working with training of police officers, of health officials, and other partners that are important in ensuring that children are better protected. And we work very much on humanitarian response as well, and preparedness to ensure that children can be really prioritized in the preparation and in the response, so that risk can be mitigated. To answer the second part of your question, what I'd like to see more of is the continuation of joint efforts, is the prioritization of the rights in children in government agendas. Very often that is not sufficient. We need to have more coordinated response. We need to have more services for children. Sometimes we see services like crisis centers or family support centers across the Pacific, but they're not specifically for children. Actually, one of our informant in PNG was telling us, you go to the police and there's nobody that can speak directly with children in such a way that confidently they can address their needs. We need dedicated trained personnel and dedicated spaces to interview children to ensure that their voice are really heard and support given.
Indeed. Hey, thank you very much for that wide-ranging and important, sobering conversation that we need to have about this topic. That is Anna Lazar, Save Children's Child Protection Technical Advisor for the Pacific. You have a good rest of your day, eh?
Thanks equally to you, Will. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Well,